Great to have you. Thanks for finding the time to join us. I'm sorry, we're running a couple of minutes here and there because we got a hybrid session, both physical and virtual. Um, so thank you for staying with us for a little bit. And welcome again to the sixth annual Cyber Future Summit. We are concluding today's session and day with three back-to-back really awesome panels. This is one of those that I can't wait for. And I think we already probably teed up this discussion yesterday. And I know, Brian, why you're smiling, because there are so many stories that you want to tell, and Kate, Greg, same as well. We had a little bit of tee off for this program, or this particular panel yesterday, and we looked through the lens of the C-suite and the board members that have to deal with cybersecurity incidents. Specifically, we touched on the ransomware situation, and then we tackled it in terms of three or four angles. One was we had Luis Aguilar, former commissioner for SEC. We had our friend Joe Sullivan, the Chief Security Officer. We had from the consulting and the incident response service security response side, from the vendor side, and then we had someone from the board position. And I cannot tell you, they're all torn apart in four different directions. I would say everybody's expectation was different. I hope we can give them some guidance and consistency, mostly in the communication part of it, where I think that the direction of resilience in business incident response probably would help. So with that, I'd like to get the introductions out to this community, of course. Let's start with, I'll just go by what I see on screen. So George Feeney, my good friend from SMU, go ahead first. Please introduce yourself.
Well, howdy, y'all. I'm George Finney. I'm the Chief Security Officer for SMU here in Dallas. So when I talk to faculty here at my university, I just introduce myself as Big Brother, because they're always worried about reading their emails or monitoring the cameras. So I have both physical security as well as cybersecurity under my belt. I'm also the author of the award-winning book Well Aware. So if you haven't heard of it before, definitely check it out.
Great deal. Awesome. Thank you. Good to have you, George. Mr. Greg Crabb. Greg, so great to see you after a long time. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I could go on about your background, but probably better to hear from yourself.
Outstanding. Nice to see you, Val, and thanks for having me. Greg Crabb. I am currently consulting, however, retired in March from the Postal Service after a 25-year law enforcement career, the last 6 of which were as the Chief Information Security Officer. Currently, I support CISA in their cybersecurity mission, and really grateful for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Greg. All right, Brian, your introductions, please.
Brian Hurd. I've been in the community since about 1993. For those of you a little younger in the audience, that's before the web existed. Been honored to help found the Cyber Counterintelligence Program at NCIS for the entire U.S. Navy, working with a lot of Greg's friends and family at Postal IG. And by the way, Greg, Steve Karinko and everybody is over here too at Strauss Freeburg Aon, so we can set up a reunion later. And I've been in the community through setting up EDS's program. I was in charge of all the identities in the U.S. watch listing system, the no-fly list, Microsoft's first chief of cybercrime, blah, 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 a bunch of other stuff. And now I work with Aon, the world-ranging insurance company, as a leader in their cyber incident response and proactive in testing. So the final bit of that is I've spent more time in boardrooms in the last 3 years helping them through ransomwares and other things than I have when I was on boards and doing things to that effect. So looking forward to a great group with Kate, Greg, and George, and Val. I'll speak for all the distance people. We love and miss you, man.
Me too. And those that are here as well. So thank you. And Kate, you have probably the most diverse background that I have ever seen in cybersecurity. So please don't miss anything. So your introductions from yourself.
That's what they say when you have kind of a messy career path, I think. It is very diverse indeed. I actually am really familiar with Brian and the guys at Stroh's because I used to work at JP Morgan Chase. Val, as you know all too well, and in security operations, and that's where I kind of got my start in cybersecurity. But I've served as the cybersecurity reporter for the Wall Street Journal as well as for CNBC. And presently, I have my own cybersecurity consulting firm. I've been in cybersecurity for about 20 years, mostly in the field. I sort of took a break to be a journalist, but then went back. And I also am a professor of cybersecurity at Georgetown University, and I lecture on cyber warfare at Yeshiva University here in Manhattan, where I'm based. And I'm also on a board of directors. I'm a member, non-executive member of the board of directors of a company called ERI, which is the country's largest electronics recycler. We fall under the critical manufacturing category, if you are thinking in terms of critical infrastructure for CISA. So that's what I'm up to these days. Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. No, thank you for joining us. And maybe, Kate, if you don't mind, we'll just start with you, because I think, you have seen all angles and you have actually represented all angles. So, most of the times people really read on the headlines of newspapers, and you have seen that too. So, can you give us a little bit of expectation setting in terms of resilience and incident response from both the corporate as well as from the communication side, right? I mean, why is this problem so important, and why should it get the attention that it needs from the top level?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think that resilience and communications resilience from the perspective of communications versus the top executives is very different sometimes. And especially as a board member, I know that I am, of course, if there were a cyber incident, I would be most interested in knowing what is our exposure financially. Obviously, the company is the thing that comes first, and the immediate need is what is first. So in a ransomware scenario, you are concerned with how much this might cost, how much downtime you might have. There may be very, very different concerns from the communications side of things, and being able to work together in tandem, can be a challenge, but it's something that's best sort of tackled early. So for communications, you're often dealing with some very complex relationships with merchants, with your third-party providers, as well as with your clients, your biggest clients. If your clients are the public at large, you are dealing with communicating with the public itself. Of course, if the press gets involved, then I've been on that side of things too. I've got to make those calls to executives just as I've been on the other side of it in the past. These are all very different sides of things, because you're looking downstream to the reputational risk of a bad communication strategy. But for the top executive, they are looking at the immediate need. So I think having that planned out ahead of time is just, tabletop. You got to do it.
Excellent. I think let's start with that. So let's move to George. George, you have been taking like what Kate just said and experienced and articulated, in your well-aware book, and you have this very well laid out and methodically. What is your kind of key takeaway from that lesson on the resilience side, and how do we make a better approach there?
Well, first, I'll just say if Val actually wrote the foreword to my book. So Val, thank you so much. And gosh, I mean, what Kate said, I think really resonates with me, because we've got a small team here in higher ed. I've got 4 cybersecurity folks that report to me. There's no way that we could be prepared to deal with an incident if we didn't have relationships already built. And I think really, the focus of the book, as and I've kind of put that my money where my mouth is in my job. Relationships are critical. So you've got to have a connection with legal. You've got to be having those conversations with the board. You've got to have, if you've got a risk department, you definitely need to have cyber risk insurance and have those relationships already built and already in place. And you have to practice, right? In terms of tabletops, that is the key. So, in the book, I talk about the 9 cybersecurity habits. And when I think about, tabletops or this preparedness part of the equation, I think of the habit of diligence. And I think it really is a habit. It has to be something that we do every day. And, there's this quote that I put forward in the book. I think that the difference between an amateur and a professional is that the professional has a plan. It isn't that the professional gets paid to do their job, right? It's that they know the things that they need to do. They know the drills that they need to do. They know where their weaknesses are, and they're going to work on it, right? I think about Shaquille O'Neal, shooting free throws, right? He knew he was terrible at it. Everybody would just foul him, and that forced him to improve his ability. And I think we've got to be doing the same thing. When it comes to cybersecurity, we got to be practicing before that incident happens in order for us to be resilient, right? And gosh, I think there's so much more we could talk about in terms of practice and tabletops. But I would love to see tabletops start to scale, right? I don't want to just see tabletops for executives or for IT staff. I wish we could rope everyone into our organizations and practice so they knew who to call when something bad happens, or that they know what they're expected to do, instead of just like, oh, I should have read that policy that maybe I was exposed to when I first started at the company 20 years ago. So yeah, we've got to practice in order to get better, just like we do fire drills. In every commercial building in the world, we ought to be doing cyber risk drills all the time.
Absolutely, and I can't overemphasize on that aspect, right? You need to practice, get the muscle memory, not only within your cyber organization but across all the stakeholders. So with that great takeaway, let's go to Greg. Greg, sir, you have seen a breadth of issues and challenges in very real, physical in many cases, and then of course digital. So from your thoughts, how do you suggest we best prepare for a resilient enterprise?
Well, the first thing that I've got to just echo my colleagues in tabletop exercises. Literally, at 1 o'clock, I got off the line after leading a tabletop exercise for a client. We had spent the last 3 hours talking about an insider threat situation and escalating that all the way up into coordinating with law enforcement and making sure that you know what you're doing when you're going to engage a law enforcement organization, and engaging the board and understanding how and when you make those notifications. And those were, it goes well beyond just the technical aspects of being able to lead an incident response. And I had the unfortunate occasion, but great experience, opportunity to lead a massive nation state attack response that the Postal Service had in 2014. There's nothing like living through the real thing. And we had lost all of our employee information in a major nation state attack. And making sure that you've got great communications across the organization, from a legal communications, employees. You can imagine our union issues that we would have had in that situation, as well as our customers and the public, was a major undertaking. And to be able to go forward with a strong message to all of the stakeholders from a communications perspective was extremely important. And I would often talk about how the disciplines of communication were probably my most important process area as a chief information security officer. And, I think that is as relevant today as it was when we had to do that 7 years ago. And really appreciate the opportunity to collaborate and talk about this now.
Of course. Thank you, Greg. Brian, coming to you, and I know you get called into when people are caught unprepared. In many cases, they're prepared, but this environment is so dynamic that you cannot be ever prepared, right? But you can try. So what are your thoughts on, you see different levels and stages of preparation. What are your thoughts on being best prepared for incident that you see?
And I want to mirror to be glad to be the cleanup batter and people that are hitting home runs after home runs in front of me. So I'll try and hold my own on the stage here. George's book and Katie and also Greg's points are well taken. One thing I'll say, and we can go into this on a different speech, not all tabletops are alike. I appreciate that CISA is putting out some free tabletops. I appreciate that the brothers and sisters at the FBI are offering them as well. But tabletops are not always tabletops. Please choose wisely. I do hundreds of those over the past couple of years too, tabletops or real world boiler room. And the thing I think, and Kate, you hit on it perfectly, and Greg, you talked about it at the thing is, there's a certain part where your legal advisors, your outside counsel and others often aren't at the tabletop. So the real team that's deployed is not actually the team you practiced with. That's one thing to make sure of, that the real team players, the real roles, and people that have been in a real firefight are helping run your tabletop. Academics are great at a lot of things, but preparing you for a real world street fight, probably not one of them. So choose your tabletop type and team and focus. And George, thanks for pinning that into your discussion too. The other thing I'll say is, at a certain point, the executives who are non-technical will need to make choices that their technology people and lawyers won't like, that they have to do the call downs with those clients Kate talked about. They'll have to have those hard discussions. And believe it or not, often when I'm sitting one-on-one with the CEO of those companies on probably the worst week of their career, I'm talking to them about the Johnson & Johnson Tylenol scandal from back before the turn of the century. And the questions we're answering have nothing to do with ransomware or technology. They have to do with, how do you want people to trust you after how you handle this incident? And that's only discussions you can have with executives in a very small setting to give them that ability to be themselves and lead. And I think that is a remarkable thing that I've seen in what George, Kate, and Greg have talked about, either in this stage or before. But it's something that's often missed in those discussions, that sometimes you just have to lead. And it goes back to that resilience, and it goes back to that confidence in leading your organization.
Oh, absolutely, well spoken. So the next, I think the natural extension of this is, when you talk about resilience, there is business resilience, there is technology resilience, right? And they need to kind of sync up in harmony, which is very hard to do. I mean, when you know that you have a patch missing and that's what caused this, it's very hard. And you saw what happened to the recent incidents of people lining up for gasoline because the two were disconnected, but still they had to shut it down in terms of pipeline. So how do you, maybe in the next discussion, we extend this discussion to the business side. So Kate, your thoughts on how can business and technology work together, because cyber cuts across all of this in towards preparing a more resilient environment? Probably still on mute. I don't have my, no, you're on mute, Mug.
I am. Okay. Somebody had to do it, and it had to be me this time. All right. So, you can mark that off on your bingo cards if you guys are playing out in the audience. I think we all know that the relationship between the business side and technology can be a little fraught sometimes, especially when there's a problem that's getting in the way of making revenue. One of the solutions, and I often talk in really broad terms, but I really like this tactical solution that's been working for us lately. And it's something that we sort of borrowed from the airline industry in terms of having a break glass plan right at your fingertips, really like written down, maybe after that tabletop or after you've done a risk assessment and you discover, okay, I'm on the business side of things or the technology side of things. And in the event of ransomware, here's the first 5 things that I'm going to do. So you just pull that out and read down that list so that you're doing those things without getting too caught up in other parts of, what eventually will be an incident that sort of unravels. And if you're on the business side of things, knowing who those clients are, who you need to have a high touch with right away about something like this, anticipating which of those clients are regulated clients, and if you have an incident and word starts getting out about it, you're going to need to inform those clients, especially if they're banks, if they are in the defense industrial space. Just having everybody fully understand and hash out their roles and have that clearly documented. I know that documentation is not at all like the sexiest of topics, but it is really, really helpful when an event actually occurs and you are able to refer to something, hopefully something that wasn't saved only on a computer database, something that you have, that you can have access to, and just clearly not stepping on one another's toes, making sure that only the people who need to be in the room to cover the incident are in the room, and that there's not too many voices that don't need to be. Having that planned ahead of time just really can take away a lot of friction, for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, that balance is so delicate, right? In many of these cases, you are under attorney-client privilege to bring in folks, outside counsel, they're directing it, and their relationship, all that matters. And you can't do it on the fly. It's essential that you actually have that well planned out. So well said, Kate. Thank you. George, I'll move to you next, just to keep this rotating. In terms of the lessons that you have together, how does the other lessons connect to the business resiliency lesson? Because I think that's quite important to understand that it's not just that moment, not the moment that you have, area that you have the right protection functions that you have in place.
Hey Val, I kind of lost audio. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Sorry about that. What I was trying to get to is, you can be resilient as a business. You can have an incident response plan, but it's not just the incident response plan, but what you have done in preparation for that, going back to the level of asset inventory, right? You need to know what you have, and then again, you need to know that something's happening in network, and then to protect it. How does the other functions relate to this whole resilience and response work?
We like to say in the cybersecurity world that we should never waste a good crisis. I think that means that we have to have the plans and preparation in place to capitalize on that, right? I think the other CISOs on the call will say, yeah, I've got a 2 or 3 year roadmap that I know where I need to go. Or where I hope to go, and man, with the pandemic, gosh, I had all of these plans ready for 2020, and in March 2020, we hit the gas, and we did all of them in like 2 weeks. And so, I guess it's a nice problem to have, having to figure out like, okay, well, what do I do now? Now that I've accomplished all my goals for the year, I guess we couldn't really go on vacation at that point, but. Yeah, I think you have to have that preparation and plan to know what you're going to do and how you're going to respond and rise to those challenges. I'm kind of dating myself here, but back in the 1980s, there was this concept of random acts of kindness. And so, right, they studied random acts of kindness to figure out whether it worked or not. And the studies that looked at it actually figured out that the people that did random acts of kindness, they were ready, right? They had prepared to seize the opportunity for when that time came to be kind to another person. And so I would encourage people to do the same and have random acts of security, right? Plan for the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year, for when those challenges are going to come up, because you're going to run into them. How are you going to act, right? What's that next step that you could take if you had all of the stars lined up to make something happen? And oh my gosh, I think when you're ready, those stars seem to align a lot more easily, and you find those opportunities much more easily.
Excellent. Thank you, George. Next, let me go to Greg. Greg, you have seen both scale and probably diversity in your environment through your career, and it has grown over a period of time. So also seen the progression in maturity. Where do you rate overall maturity for business resilience, and what do you suggest to those that are trying to ramp up a mini incident response program or a massive business resilience program? What are your few steps to get there?
I think that first you have to have recognition that you need to have one. And unfortunately, I see a lot of organizations read the headlines, but then don't take action. And I think there has been a lot of call to action over the last, particularly 6 months with the new administration, starting with the executive order and the open letter to businesses relative to having a ability to address ransomware. I'm still finding that organizations aren't heeding those calls for action. And I think that's probably the first thing that needs to be done is recognize that you have the problem and that you need to address the issue of resilience and business continuity for your organization. And then the next is discipline, and establish a discipline that will allow you to advance from your current state to where you need to go, right? And understanding how you currently perform in times of stress and be able to put in the process discipline. And you talked about asset inventory, know your software, know your vulnerabilities, that whole CIS control activity. There's a reason for all of those and why they're extremely important. And being able to play at a high level of discipline across all of those activities is extremely important for operational resilience, for a security practice, and support the businesses, as we talked about earlier. So those are some of my ideas. And quite frankly, I've had the good fortune of being able to sit and examine some of the situations that CIS has been seeing in the last 6 months. And we, as critical infrastructure owners across the nation, need to continue to improve our game in this area of business continuity and resilience.
That's excellent advice, and probably great building blocks towards getting the level of maturity up if you're starting from scratch, or even if you're at a stage where you really need drastic improvement. With that, let me come to Brian. I don't want to take away any business that you have, Brian, but I'm sure there are businesses that you don't want to take at times because the situation is terrible. Just like you land, when you get a call, you land there and you're like, I wish I was not called in, right? So I speak out of experience because that's what I've gone through many situations. I say, how did I get myself here? Okay. So with respect to resilience or incident response, Brian, any nuggets that you can share about situations that you have to deal with where the environment is totally non-prepared, and then the effort and also the cost of doing that then versus doing it before, right?
In any situation, the cost of doing it on a whiteboard is less than 1x. The cost of doing it after you've developed the software and deployed it is 100x, and every stage in between. George, I don't know if that was in the book, but I'm going to credit you with that one as well. Right. The other thing is, and never waste a crisis. That was Greg and me and 30 years ago in the government, but the commercial people picked it up. The things I'll say is the thing I think that I've always been a fan of, and it's the reason I work for an insurance company. This is an enterprise risk discussion. It's not a cyber discussion. I think all the panelists would agree. Yeah. And when you look at the qualifications to get insurance, not just cyber, business interruption, D&O, directors and officers, errors and omissions for your supply chain product, vis-a-vis SolarWinds or whatever. Mm-hmm. Starting with that discussion, you now have the general counsel, as Kate indicated, for regulatory, George, as you've said, the other leaders around the organization, even the chief of HR is involved, and the chief risk officer who's trying to get the overall insurance fabric. We do that all the time. I work with clients. In terms of getting called in, it goes back to, and Greg, I'll go a little bit to your world. It goes back to that crisis management of being what I call my team cyber smoke jumpers. We jump in and land in the middle of a forest fire. And then we dig up and we found there's a burial ground under the forest fire. We're like, okay. And then under that, you find toxic drums of stuff in the shared drive that everybody thought weren't there. And I don't care what company, government organization, or even, not to pick on them, but educational institution you're in, your sins are in the shared drive. Go clean those up first. So that's one of the things about knowledge management that relates to cyber resilience. Knowing what you have. You should always have a list of your clients from most important to least important to do that call down for a bunch of reasons. Additionally, just to kind of round out, but glad to go into detail, there are 9 causal areas that the insurance companies have found around ransomware. They are the seatbelts, airbags, or smoke detectors and sprinkler systems of their time, because that's what insurance companies do. We look at all the claims, we bring them back around to the qualification process, and it's a virtuous loop. A lot of people don't understand the role of that because it's not car companies that invented airbags and seatbelts. It was insurance companies that demand them. Try and get homeowners insurance and not have a smoke detector. Same thing in cyber, and the market is hardened. So that enterprise risk management discussion, hitting the areas in George's book and the stuff from Kate and Greg, I think is the way to go.
Okay, that's excellent, and especially I know jumping from one fire to the other is probably can be very stressing. But that lesson that we learned from there is basically what you can do not to have that fire at the first place, right? Right. So, Kate, going back to you with your kind of broad experience both in the corporate world, being part of those programs, and now leading the board discussion, where do you see the communication going from? And then this is coming from the last evening's kind of takeaway, is that there's a huge gap in communication between the cyber folks and the board. What are your key nuggets that you would share with the audience here about what do you want to hear as a board member, because you're cyber aware and an expert with great repute? But what do you see your peers in the board want to hear? You get a second chance as unmuting yourself. But I was trying to be polite. So
I'm so glad. I know. I'm so glad my kids aren't here to laugh at me, because I wouldn't hear the end of it. So they're at school. So, all right. One of the things that board members, they get very anxious about the stories that they see in the news. They can be very now focused. And I think, from both sides, in terms of the cybersecurity organization communicating to the board and vice versa, they need to take the focus off so much of the technology and process, which those conversations are completely filled with the project management, the technologies that we have in place, and talk a little bit about the people, because the greatest disconnect I see is between the board having a good understanding that their cybersecurity organization is actually well structured, and the cybersecurity organization itself able to communicate interpersonal difficulties, organizational problems with reporting structure that are making things difficult. Like, for instance, if you have a cybersecurity officer reporting up to a CIO in a really high innovation company, and that company is constantly trying to push out new apps, you might have a CIO that is setting aside a lot of security issues that he or she shouldn't be, because that cybersecurity officer is being buried underneath that person, and that cybersecurity officer should be reporting up to a CEO. Having the board, being able to communicate people issues to the board, and the board being able to recognize people problems is kind of one of the biggest skill gaps that I see. And I really want to see boards get better at recognizing when there's difficulties in their cybersecurity organization. And I can say from my experience as a reporter that I was on the receiving end of a lot of disgruntled employees' phone calls. As you know, things can go wrong in these cybersecurity organizations, especially at big companies, and there are no shortage of people who are willing to share those problems with outsiders if they are not addressed. And I think more than really any other organization within your company, the cybersecurity organization is one that is just really susceptible to having toxic people within it. If you have people who are being bad actors in some way or another, especially in how they interact with each other, it can be a security risk to your company. So you need to focus on the people as much as the process and technology.
All right. No, that's very important. I think we'll probably carry a long way to get it sunk in to the rest of the world. I think there are some boards and some, there's definitely a level of maturity gap across a variety of institutions, even variety of sectors are at different levels of maturity. So with that, we have a couple of minutes to wrap this up and probably quick final thoughts from the panel here. Greg, maybe we start with you.
Sure. I think one of the themes of the discussion has been prepare, prepare, prepare. And you can't do enough of that when it comes to being able to prepare from a communications perspective, from a technology perspective, and definitely when it comes to interacting with the board. So that's my contribution.
Excellent. No, prepare, prepare, prepare. Do not forget that. So thank you, Greg. George?
I'll pick up on something that Kate said. We talk about insecurity, people, processes, and technology, but really, I think like they're equal slices of a pie, right? And yet we're entirely focused on the technology. And as we think about it, right, people are the ones that create the technology and can configure and use the technology. People are the ones that create the processes and either follow or not the processes. I think the pie is all people, and the process and technology are just like sprinkled in for flavor. Gotta have a huge focus on people, on your culture to create a cyber secure culture. And really help people to use the technology. Technology is just another fancy term for tool. How are they going to use those tools to achieve the organization's goals securely?
Excellent. Thank you, Josh, for that. Brian, I'll give you the last word.
Thanks to my fellow panelists for getting most of the words in, which allows me to focus on one minor issue, is the paperwork. You can't establish privilege without a contract. You don't want to be trying to redline your contracts either Friday night at 9 p.m. or Sunday morning of a 3-day weekend at 9 a.m. because that's when you're going to call me. Don't pick your Super Bowl team on game day. Whatever analogy works for you in this regard, you have to align with your insurance carrier and their panel vendors, your outside counsel and their ability to sign for you, and then make sure all those people are lined up so we can deploy a joint strike force for you. There are a lot of great vendors out there. We happen to be one of them, but pick your heart surgeon well, please. And then that's the kind of thing is think about those things, not only from the technology side, but great. What is the legal team going to do? What is the business team going to do? Who's going to call who? And as dumb as the following thing sounds, please take your playbook for ransomware and print it out because your system won't work when you're trying to use it. I've had clients have to Google my phone number to try and figure it out because their email was down. Have the phone numbers to call on a card in your wallet, or if you're a little younger than that, on a picture on your iPhone or other phone, so I don't play to Apple too much. Prepare in advance. Let the panelists, myself, others know how we can help. We'd much rather talk to you in daylight than in a rain and storm.
Yeah, absolutely. Very well said. And thank you so much. This has been a great discussion, and I hope there are many takeaways that we can actually put into action. So thank you, Brian, Kate, Greg, George. It was great chatting with you. Okay. Have a good weekend. Thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
With that, I
Thank you
welcome
all.
my friend Bob